Two parents said their 7-month-old son was kidnapped. They're now charged with his murder. Welcome to Behind the Crime, where true crime meets real life. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Let's uncover the truth, one case at a time. Now let's see today's story. It was the kind of story that chills every parent to the bone. A mother, bloodied and bruised, claimed she had been ambushed outside a sporting goods store in Southern California. Her 7-month-old baby boy, tiny, innocent, still in diapers, was gone. The call came to police on the night of August 14, 2025, a desperate voice crackling through the line. "Someone attacked me," she said. "My baby, he's gone." Within hours, the case of missing baby Emmanuel Haro gripped the nation. Television stations flashed his photo on the screen. Flyers bearing his sweet round face, wide eyes, soft cheeks, wisps of dark hair, were taped to windows, tacked to telephone poles, and handed out by volunteers. The community of Yucaipa, a small city about 20 miles east of San Bernardino, rallied behind the parents. Crowds gathered at vigils. Strangers wept as they lit candles. Mothers clutched their own children a little tighter. And Rebecca and Jake Haro, Emmanuel's parents, stood before the cameras, pleading for mercy. Rebecca, her eye blackened, her voice shaking, looked into the lens and begged, "Please don't hurt him. Protect him. Bring him back to his parents that love him." Her husband Jake echoed her cries. "He was a healthy baby," he told a reporter, choking back tears. "He was crawling, he was kicking, he was playing with his toys. Whoever took our son, please, give him back." It seemed like a nightmare pulled straight from the headlines. A random act of violence, a baby snatched from his mother's arms, a family torn apart. But in the days that followed, police would peel back the layers of the Haro story. And what they uncovered was darker and far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. This is the story of the disappearance and death of baby Emmanuel Haro, a story of lies, abuse, and a justice system that may have failed to stop a tragedy before it ever began. On the evening of August 14th, Rebecca Haro pulled her SUV into the parking lot of a Big Five sporting goods store in Yucaipa. According to her version of events, it was an ordinary errand that spiraled into unthinkable horror. She told police she was outside her vehicle, changing her infant son Emmanuel's diaper on the passenger seat. It was a task she'd done countless times before, balancing wipes, a fresh diaper, and a squirming baby who had only just begun to crawl. But as she leaned down to adjust his clothes, Rebecca claimed she was startled by a voice. "Someone said, 'Hola,'" she later told reporters, "and I couldn't even turn. That was just, I don't remember nothing." Her next memory, she said, was waking up on the asphalt, dazed, disoriented, and battered. Her eye was swollen. She had bruises. And worst of all, Emmanuel was gone. Her alleged attacker, she said, had vanished into the night with her baby. The 911 call sparked an all-hands-on-deck search. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department deployed deputies, search dogs, and helicopters. Volunteers scoured the streets, alleys, and open fields. Every second mattered. Sheriff's officials held a press conference, urging the public to stay alert. Reporters broadcast Emmanuel's photo across Southern California. Online, strangers shared the missing flyer thousands of times. One haunting image circulated everywhere. Rebecca and Jake clutching each other, Emmanuel's face on the flyer in their hands, the words "Please bring him home" etched in bold letters. The couple's pleas seemed genuine, raw, the kind of grief that anyone could empathize with. At a vigil outside their Cabazon home, dozens gathered to pray. Neighbors lit candles, left stuffed animals, and sang hymns beneath the glow of streetlights. One mourner whispered to a reporter, "You can feel their pain. I can't imagine losing a baby like that." But behind the scenes, investigators were already uneasy. Within the first 24 hours, inconsistencies began to surface in Rebecca's story. For starters, there was no Amber Alert. Authorities explained that the strict criteria for issuing one hadn't been met. At the time, they said they couldn't confirm Emmanuel was actually abducted. Why not? Because something about the Haros account wasn't adding up. Detectives pressed Rebecca in interviews. But when confronted with discrepancies, details that didn't align with evidence on the ground, she abruptly stopped cooperating. Meanwhile, teams served search warrants on the couple's home. They scoured the property with K9 units. Surveillance footage was pulled from businesses near the sporting goods store. As investigators pieced together the puzzle, a chilling realization emerged. The kidnapping may never have happened at all. By the second day, whispers began to ripple through the department. Deputies who had been part of the frantic search were quietly questioning what they'd been told. If Rebecca had truly been ambushed in the parking lot, why hadn't anyone else seen it? The store was open, lights were bright, and shoppers were coming and going. In a small community like Yucaipa, a violent struggle outside a sporting goods store wouldn't have gone unnoticed. And then there was her injury. A blackened eye, some swelling, minor bruises. Enough to appear serious on camera, but not consistent with the kind of brutal attack she had described. Investigators began dissecting her timeline. The diaper change, the sudden greeting of hola, the blackout. The story was almost too neat, like a script. And yet, the Haros doubled down. They stood before reporters again, appealing to the alleged kidnapper. Jake's words trembled with desperation. "Whoever took our son, please give him back. Please." But behind the cameras, detectives were pulling surveillance video from the shopping center. What they found was damning. There was no evidence of a stranger lurking. No one seen rushing away with a baby. No suspicious car speeding out of the lot. Hours of footage yielded nothing. As suspicions grew, so did the rift between investigators and the Haros. When detectives pressed Rebecca further, she shut down entirely. According to the sheriff's department, she declined to continue the interview when her inconsistencies were pointed out. Meanwhile, search warrants on the Cabazon home revealed additional red flags. Detectives brought in cadaver dogs. They sifted through personal belongings. They collected evidence that painted a picture far more sinister than a random abduction. Still, to the public, the Haros maintained their performance. Rebecca clutched flyers, her voice breaking, her eyes wet with tears. Jake described Emmanuel's laughter, his crawling, his toys. They looked, to the casual observer, like any devastated parents. But the evidence was stacking up. By August 22nd, just 8 days after Rebecca's desperate 911 call, authorities made their move. It was early morning in Cabazon, a desert community nestled against the San Jacinto Mountains. Neighbors woke to the sound of police sirens and the sight of unmarked vehicles lining the street. Armed deputies approached the Haros home. Video later released by the sheriff's department showed the moment. Rebecca, in casual clothes, her hair disheveled, was led out of the house, hands cuffed behind her back. Her expression was blank, distant. Jake followed shortly after, also cuffed, his face tight and grim. The couple who had once stood before cameras as grieving parents were now perp-walked to police vehicles, accused of the unthinkable, murdering their own child. Both were charged with murder and filing a false police report. Each was booked into separate Riverside County jails on $1 million bail. At a press conference, Riverside County District Attorney Mike Hestron didn't mince words. "It's appropriate to have a press conference because it was the defendants in this case who had a press conference first," he said. "They did so to tell the public, the media, and ultimately law enforcement that their child had been kidnapped. That is not what occurred. The truth," he said, "was far worse. Between August 5th and August 14th, sometime in the 9 days before their supposed kidnapping call, Emmanuel had been killed. His tiny body, investigators believed, bore the marks of abuse. The filing in this case reflects our belief that baby Emmanuel was abused, victim of child abuse over time," Hestron explained. "And because of that abuse, he succumbed to those injuries." The chilling revelation silenced the community. The image of grieving parents begging for their child's return was shattered, replaced with the stark reality that those same parents were now accused of taking his life. But the horror didn't stop there, because Emmanuel's body was still missing. In the days following the arrest, search teams fanned out across Riverside County. On Sunday, August 24th, investigators returned to the desert, this time with Jake Haro in tow. Handcuffed, flanked by deputies and accompanied by cadaver dogs, he was led off the freeway near Gilman Springs Road in Moreno Valley. The team scoured the dusty terrain, brush, and ravines. 4 hours they searched, probing the earth, hoping for even the smallest trace of the missing child. But Emmanuel wasn't there. Authorities revealed they had a pretty strong indication of where his remains might be. But they were careful, meticulous, unwilling to say more. The investigation, they said, was still ongoing. When the press dug into Jake Haro's past, a chilling truth surfaced. This wasn't his first time facing child abuse allegations. In 2018, his infant daughter had been rushed to the hospital. Doctors found broken bones, healing fractures, a skull fracture, and brain hemorrhaging. It was a case of long-term, systematic abuse. In 2021, Jake was charged with child abuse. By 2023, he pleaded guilty. But instead of prison, he received probation. His sentence was suspended. That little girl survived, but not without consequences. She is now permanently bedridden, living with cerebral palsy caused by the abuse. District Attorney Hestron was blunt about what this meant. Jake Haro should have been in prison at the time this crime happened, he said. If that judge had done his job as he should have done, Emmanuel would be alive today. That's a shame and it's an outrage. Sheriff Chad Bianco echoed the anger. There is absolutely nothing worse than harming a baby, he said. Broken bones, injuries, life-altering trauma. Had that case been handled as it should have been, Emmanuel would still be with us today. The killing of baby Emmanuel, authorities declared, was preventable. And in that knowledge lay the most bitter truth of all. Back in Cabazon, the community reeled. The same neighbors who had stood in candlelight vigils days before, praying for Emmanuel's safe return, now gathered at a makeshift memorial for a child who would never come home. Flowers piled against the Haros fence. Teddy bears sat in the dust, their fur collecting desert sand. Balloons bobbed gently in the hot August breeze. One woman, tears streaking her face, whispered to a reporter, "We believed them. We stood with them. And all along it was a lie." The betrayal cut deep. Because in the beginning, everyone wanted to believe in the horror of a kidnapping. The faceless stranger, the sudden violence, the desperate search. But the truth was closer to home. It was darker. And it was inflicted not by a stranger, but by the very people who were supposed to love Emmanuel most. The arrests of Jake and Rebecca Haro sent shockwaves across Riverside and San Bernardino counties. 4 days, Emmanuel's sweet little face had been on every screen, every flyer, every news broadcast. His disappearance had been the kind of story that draws strangers together. Parents hugging their children tighter, volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder in candlelit vigils, neighbors staying up late hoping for updates. And now that collective hope curdled into betrayal. Because the people they had been comforting, the people they had been standing beside, the parents who had begged for Emmanuel's return, were now accused of killing him. For many it was unthinkable. For others it was infuriating. At a vigil held just days after the arrests, mourners gathered once more outside the Haro family's Cabazon home. But this time the atmosphere was different. Instead of prayers for Emmanuel's safe return, there were prayers for justice. Instead of holding out hope, people held one another in disbelief. Candles flickered in the night, casting soft light on teddy bears and balloons left in Emmanuel's honor. One neighbor told a reporter, "It's hard to believe we were all out here, supporting them, crying with them. And now we know. They lied to us. They lied to everybody." Another resident put it more bluntly. "They used this community. They used our compassion to cover up what they had done." For investigators, the case was both emotionally and professionally grueling. Sheriff Shannon Dykes admitted as much at a press conference. "The circumstances surrounding this investigation are tragic," he said. "We will continue to search for Emmanuel, and I trust our justice system will hold the parents accountable." As the community reeled, investigators pressed forward with the most heartbreaking task of all: finding Emmanuel's remains. Search teams deployed with cadaver dogs along stretches of remote desert land. Deputies walked through ravines, brush, and dirt roads in blistering summer heat. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning for disturbances in the terrain. On August 24th, just 2 days after the Haros arrests, detectives escorted Jake to a desolate area off Gilman Springs Road in Moreno Valley. Shackled, flanked by deputies, he was led into the desert. It was a grim sight, the alleged killer helping to search for the tiny body of the son he was accused of murdering. 4 hours, investigators combed the area. But when the sun dipped below the horizon, they returned empty-handed. District Attorney Hestron admitted what many feared: Emmanuel's body had not yet been found. Still, he insisted investigators had a pretty strong indication of where the remains might be. Behind his calm, measured tone, there was an urgency. Everyone knew, the longer the desert heat and elements pressed on, the harder it would be to find Emmanuel's body, and the more difficult it would be to secure conclusive evidence. But despite the setbacks, law enforcement vowed not to give up. As news of the case spread, another disturbing chapter in Jake Haro's life came to light, one that raised serious questions about the justice system itself. Years earlier, in 2018, another of Jake's children had been hospitalized. Doctors found a series of devastating injuries: broken bones, healing fractures, a skull fracture, and bleeding inside the brain. The infant girl, it turned out, had been systematically abused. In 2021, Jake was charged with child abuse. And in 2023, he pleaded guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. The injuries were permanent. That little girl survived, but only barely. She now lives bedridden, permanently disabled, with cerebral palsy. It was, prosecutors said, one of the clearest cases of child abuse they had ever seen. But instead of prison, Jake Haro was given probation. His sentence was suspended, meaning he would only serve time if he violated the terms of his release. That decision, prosecutors argued, sealed Emmanuel's fate. District Attorney Hestron's voice trembled with anger as he addressed the press. Jake Haro should have been in prison at the time this crime happened. If that judge had done his job as he should have done, Emmanuel would be alive today. That's a shame. And it's an outrage. Sheriff Chad Bianco echoed the outrage. There is absolutely nothing worse than harming a baby, broken bones, injuries, life-altering trauma. Had that case been handled as it should have been, Emmanuel would still be with us today. The idea that the system had failed twice, first with Jake's daughter and now with Emmanuel, ignited fury across the county. On social media, parents demanded accountability. How, they asked, could a man convicted of brutal child abuse walk free? How could a child's life be gambled on the hope of rehabilitation? The questions had no easy answers. But for Emmanuel, it was too late. Even as investigators pieced together the truth, footage of Jake and Rebecca's public pleas circulated online. A chilling reminder of how convincing lies can be. Rebecca, her voice trembling, holding back sobs, clutching a flyer with Emmanuel's photo. Jake, describing how his son had been crawling, playing with toys, kicking with joy. The performance was eerily effective. In those early days, strangers believed them. Neighbors believed them. Reporters believed them. But detectives, the ones who watched body language, measured words, cross-checked timelines, had noticed something was off. When the arrests came, those haunting public pleas took on an entirely new meaning. What looked like grief now looked like manipulation. What looked like desperation now looked like a cover-up. And what looked like two parents begging for their baby's return now looked like two killers begging for the world to believe their lie. For the people of Yucaipa, Cabazon, and the surrounding areas, the grief cut deep. Not just for Emmanuel, but for the betrayal of trust. One mother who had attended the early vigils told a reporter, "We wanted to help. We wanted to believe them. And now it feels like we were part of their performance. That's the hardest part. We prayed with them while they knew what really happened." Another resident who left flowers at the Haro home put it more simply. The hardest thing to accept is that Emmanuel never had a chance. In the desert heat, the memorial outside the Haro home grew. Stuffed animals faded in the sun. Flowers wilted. Balloons sagged. But people kept coming, quietly paying respects to a child they had never met. Because in Emmanuel they saw every baby. Innocent, fragile, deserving of love and safety. And in the Haros they saw the darkest side of humanity, the very people meant to protect him accused of destroying him. The disappearance and death of baby Emmanuel Haro is more than a single tragic case. It is a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the fragility of justice, the failures of accountability, and the darkest capabilities of human behavior. From the moment District Attorney Mike Hestron stood at the podium, there was no mistaking his fury. He wasn't just prosecuting a murder case. He was putting the system itself on trial. The fact that Jake Haro had once stood accused of brutalizing his infant daughter, and then walked free with probation, was, in Hestron's words, an outrageous error in judgment. And he wasn't alone in that assessment. Sheriff Chad Bianco minced no words either. "There is absolutely nothing worse than harming a baby," he told reporters. Had that case been handled as it should have been, Emmanuel would still be with us today. The subtext was clear. This wasn't just a crime committed by two parents. It was a failure of the system designed to protect children. Judges are entrusted with balancing justice and mercy. But in Jake Haro's case, mercy cost a child his life. It's the kind of decision that leaves scars on entire communities. And for Emmanuel, there would be no second chance. Looking back, the images are haunting. Rebecca clutching a missing child flyer, her blackened eye framed by cameras. Jake's trembling voice as he described his son's laughter. On the surface it was grief, but in hindsight it was theater. The Haros press conferences and media pleas weren't just desperate attempts to find a missing child. They were calculated moves to shape a narrative, to manipulate the public, to divert suspicion. And it worked, at least for a while. Neighbors believed them. Strangers prayed for them. Vigils were held in their honor. For law enforcement, the manipulation cut even deeper. Sheriff Shannon Dykes explained why they felt compelled to set the record straight. It's appropriate to have a press conference because it was the defendants in this case who had a press conference first. They did so in order to tell the public, the media, and ultimately law enforcement that their child had been kidnapped, when in fact that's not what occurred. It was a chilling reminder that not all tears are genuine, and not all pleas are honest. To this day, Emmanuel's body has not been found. Investigators have scoured remote desert land, canyons, and ravines. They've deployed cadaver dogs, drones, and manpower under the relentless California sun. At one point, they even brought Jake himself to the desert, hoping he might finally cooperate and reveal the truth about his son's final resting place. But Emmanuel remains missing. Without a body, there are questions that may never be answered. How exactly did he die? Where is he now? And will his remains ever be recovered, or will the desert forever hold its secret? For prosecutors, the case remains strong even without a body. The evidence of abuse, the inconsistencies, the timeline, all of it paints a devastating picture. But for the community, the lack of closure is unbearable. A neighbor who attended Emmanuel's memorial put it simply: "We can't bury him. We can't give him peace." And that's the hardest part. What makes Emmanuel's case especially painful is that it didn't have to happen. Jake's prior conviction was a glaring red flag. The abuse of his daughter was severe, systematic, and permanently life-altering. And yet, a judge chose leniency, a suspended sentence, probation. It was a gamble on rehabilitation, but one that came at the expense of child safety. Child advocates point out that Emmanuel's case is part of a broader pattern. Across the country, countless children fall through the cracks of a system that often prioritizes second chances for abusers over absolute protection for the vulnerable. Verbal abuse, physical abuse, neglect. Too often, the signs are overlooked until it's too late. And when a baby dies, outrage fills the air, but systemic reform remains elusive. Emmanuel's story is a call to confront that failure. To ask, how many more children must suffer before the system changes? In Cabazon, the makeshift memorial outside the Haro home became a symbol of grief and betrayal. Teddy bears and flowers piled against the fence, wilting under the desert sun. Balloons floated lifeless in the hot wind. But people kept coming, quietly, reverently, leaving tokens of love for a baby they never knew, but whose story had pierced their hearts. For some, it was an act of mourning. For others, it was an act of defiance, a way of reclaiming Emmanuel's memory from the lies that had surrounded his death. One mother, tears streaking her cheeks, summed up the collective sorrow. "We prayed with them. We searched with them. And all along it was a lie. Emmanuel deserved so much better." As the case moves toward trial, Jake and Rebecca Haro sit behind bars, awaiting arraignment. Both face charges of murder and filing a false police report. Each is held on a $1 million bond. Prosecutors will present a chilling narrative. A baby abused over time, his death concealed by a fabricated story of kidnapping, his parents weaponizing public sympathy to shield themselves from suspicion. The defense has remained quiet so far. But in court, they may try to argue technicalities, a lack of a body, questions about timing, challenges to the evidence. It will be, without question, a difficult trial. But for investigators, prosecutors, and the community, the mission is clear: to give Emmanuel the justice he was denied in life. On a hot August night in Southern California, a desperate call for help set off a chain of events that gripped the nation. A mother claimed she had been attacked. The baby was missing. The community rallied. A nation prayed. But the truth unraveled quickly. The kidnapping never happened. The tears were a performance. The grieving parents were accused killers. And the baby, 7-month-old Emmanuel Haro, had been gone all along. His body is still missing. His memory lives only in photographs, in the flicker of vigil candles, in the stuffed animals left at a desert home where he should have grown up safe and loved. The case is now in the hands of the courts. But for many, Emmanuel's story will always be a reminder of both the darkness human beings are capable of, and the urgent need to protect the most vulnerable among us. Because if there is one truth that lingers long after the cameras leave and the headlines fade, it is this: there was no kidnapper. There was no stranger. The danger was inside his own home. And baby Emmanuel never stood a chance. Thank you for staying through to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel.